More players on the move on a Tuesday, folks, right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for our new transfer portal and recruiting update show each and every day on the move. So we're going to ask you to not be on the move for the next, 45 minutes. Just sit still and we will. But if you are on the move, certainly you can listen in as Leanne Herring and myself run down the latest from the transfer portal. Leanne, how you doing today?
Doing good. You know that we're standing on business. A lot of business deals being handled within the last 24 hours. I got my backboard hat action going on. We have a few key commits, some that we knew were where they were going, and a few kind of surprises that didn't even take less than 24 hours to get going. We have some guys on the move, a lot of high profile guys, and a lot of big hot ticket items, like as I like to say, are making visits today throughout the SEC, ACC. We're getting some big time playmakers, of course, for the next couple of days. Some will be spending multiple days. Some will be hitting, place to place, like we said yesterday. It's kind of like speed dating. Everybody's kind of getting the feel for things. We have some guys kind of narrowing down, and the quarterback position. We all know what a necessity that is. There's been a lot of guys from across the board, a lot of programs in search for their starter, looking to kind of change momentum. We talked a little bit about, Jackson Arnold yesterday and his commitment to Auburn and how that's looking, with Deuce Knight also being in the picture. We see a lot of quarterbacks on the move right now, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit. Of course, Washington State quarterback John Mateer has now toppled Eric Singleton as the #1 overall guy in the portal. Has a lot of interest, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So a lot of movers and shakers going on, so let's just get to it.
We could just stay right there with John Mateer. Again, a guy that accounted for 44 touchdowns at Washington State. And of course, they've got this amazing quarterback legacy since Mike Leach was there and took over about 12 years ago. And John Mateer had an outstanding season, and he's up for grabs. And as you mentioned, #1 player on the board. And you've got some rustlings out there about where he might be headed, where he's visited, and who might be creeping up the ladder.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, we said the quarterback position has been one that's been a hot commodity for a lot of programs. Like I said, looking for their right fit. We have a lot of programs looking to change the momentum. Definitely the portals where they're getting them. Like we said, Washington State quarterback John Mateer has been on the rise. He's been a significant target. A lot of teams have come after him, but it appears right now this is one of those recruitments where I always say, we're just talking about it, where relationships do matter. And a lot of these times we see that, especially in the QB position, development comes into key here. And one of the main players that we're hearing, that it seems like that's where all the chips are going. That's where all is Brett Venables down in Oklahoma. Of course, Mateer grew up coming out of Little Elm, Texas, which is about 2 hours away from Norman. So, during his high school recruitment, Oklahoma, obviously Brett Venables was not there during his recruitment, but also it was a place that recruited him highly. But another thing to be noted, that not only is his former offensive coordinator, but his quarterback coach is now, both of those guys are now at Oklahoma. So, all the things are adding up. All the things are looking towards Oklahoma, but not so fast. Like I always say, a name that we know is definitely looking for a QB and is really kind of talking about going not just on the NIL side, the financial side, but Miami is coming in pretty hot pursuit of Mateer's services. We're kind of hearing that they're not really only pulling on the elephant, but they're using Cam Ward as a perfect example of how they can develop quarterbacks in his kind of type of situation and make him starting player guy. So Oklahoma seems to have the edge, but again, Miami is coming in swiftly and abruptly to try to get Mateer to be their next signal caller, down in South Florida.
Absolutely. John Mateer would be a prized pickup for anyone, of course, as the #1 quarterback and arguably the #1 player on the board as it stands right now. There's a former 4-star, Leanne, that you are very familiar with, Kewan Lacey, who made his original decision to go to Missouri, got on the field, got some valuable playing time as a freshman with 104 yards rushing, but he is headed elsewhere in the SEC.
Yes, he is. And this was one that we talked a lot about. That if you know, you know, and where relationships also matter. Keywan Lacey was in the Ole Miss Rebels were in heavy pursuit of him coming out of high school. It came right down to the wire, and he ultimately decided to go to Mizzou. But as soon as we hit the transfer portal, um, I knew that that was a name that definitely, especially being at the running back position, we know that Ole Miss is definitely shopping to create more depth in their running back. We did sign out of high school, out of Baylor School, Shakai Mills Knight, 4-star running back. But of course, you can never have too much. We look for Ole Miss to be adding maybe two up to three. We've already seen that Armand Hardy's come through. So this is a really big get for the Rebels as far as depth in their running back room. It was less than maybe a couple hours. I had kind of talked to some sources saying, so it was like keeping quiet on exciting information when you get that, because like you said, not because in this kind of process, as much as a kid could be committed and ready to go to school, we see it every time. We're seeing it here where other schools slide in really quickly. So I always say it's not done until you hear confirmation. And I got late confirmation yesterday afternoon that it was pretty much going to be a done deal, and that was a really exciting get. But like I said, when I saw Lacey come up on the board, and obviously being a running back position, I knew that Ole Miss was definitely crazy not to go after him, considering the relationships. He didn't have a standout season, but again, another productive player, of course, coming out of Texas. Ole Miss has had great track records with kids from Texas roots as far as the running back position. Comes out of Lancaster, Texas. So yeah, didn't take too long. It was another silent recruitment when we talk about Lane Kiffin knowing how to maneuver, and Kevin Smith, running back coach, knowing how to work the phones and knowing how to make moves in silence. This is one of another key signature recruitment for Lane Kiffin. Like I said, there wasn't much to it. It was pretty much, he hits the portal, negotiations start, and then he's an Ole Miss Rebel.
Leanne, our buddy Will ND is giving us some information here on the chat. Will, it's good to see you. Appreciate you being here. So he's letting us know that Devontae Smith, Alabama, replacing Notre Dame DB Jordan Clark. So that's another 2025 pickup for Notre Dame from Alabama. Apparently, as Will is telling us, that Devontae Smith is making the move to South Bend. He's from Cincinnati, has a family situation there that he's protecting. So there's a big move of a starting defensive back going from Alabama to Notre Dame. And speaking of the Tide, you were way in front of this one for days and days and days and days and days, going back like 2 weeks with Jaheim Otis going west, as a lot of people are these days, to the Rocky Mountains.
Yes, definitely going out west. This is something, I know a lot of Ole Miss fans, were told, are you really sure this is how it's going to go? And I said, unfortunately, I think just with the way the circumstances are, like I said, he's also about to be a new dad. So we got to remember this is also a business move. Not only are they looking at their football career, they're looking at the time availability. He would have 2 years of eligibility, but I think similar to what we saw into Walter Nolan's case, I'm not sure that he would stay for the full 2 years. So he's looking to a place where he can definitely, not financially be successful. Obviously, I think Colorado is clear to say that they've negotiated quite a substantial deal for him that's going to be significant. But also he's going to be, an impact player where he can also go to develop. And I see him really building his NFL draft stock. So this came as no surprise. When the deal was officially done, yesterday, Otis was there, on his social, obviously tweeting pictures of Dion, that he had found his new home. But again, this was no surprise. It's something we've been talking about and kind of sharing about, that Colorado came in pretty strongly from the jump. I think Ole Miss, as far as the fan base and some of the, insiders thought that we would get a shot at, obviously, considering, the routes to Columbia, Mississippi, possibly the return, like as many players we see want to play closer to home, family, otherwise reasons. But unfortunately in this one, Colorado, was just able to edge. And I think too, we have to think about it. We have to remember, and I mentioned it yesterday in the show, a player like Otis is very talented, even though he didn't see a lot of action due to injury. Obviously Alabama, we have a lot of take from his high school career, and we know that he has the potential to be very successful at the next level due to his size, physicality, everything you look for in a star lineman. However, at the same time, we know that that comes with a heavy price tag. Just ask the Ole Miss Rebels for what they, invested last year. And considering that Ole Miss we're not rebuilding it like we were, a couple years ago, but we are having to go and find some key positions in quarterbacks and running backs, obviously some wide receivers, keep adding, to that defensive momentum. And with all that, that's one thing that Lane Kiffin and his staff have to think about. How do we allocate, the financial end of this? Do we go and invest, like I said, put all our chips in one guy, not discrediting his talent because he is totally worth that investment, but knowing that if they go take on a player like Otis or try to put themselves in a hat, like in the running, that means that we may not be able to take other high profile players. For example, not saying that this is how it go. We might not have to say no to an Eric Singleton, who's pretty high profile right now. And is, his NIL stock is definitely on the rise. I think they're saying, he's not going to get less than $1 million, from the jump, just because he's so high profile right now. And LSU, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, a lot of teams are in the hunt for his services. So, it's just a matter, again, this comes down to money ball. A lot of kids, it's not that they don't want to come back home close to their roots, but again, we have to look at the financial and we have to play smart about this, because again, if you're in a place like Ole Miss or other places looking to build their rosters, then you have to be smart about it. Whereas Colorado, may have that money to put towards up front because they may not have to get as many players from the roster, or looking to build their program around a lot of players in the process, in the portal.
Leanne, before we get to some more of your notes and what you've picked up over the last several hours, there's a couple wide receivers out of the ACC that have caught my attention here. So this just came down in the last half hour from Jackie
Wow.
Franchuli, one of our friends from 247 Sports, who drops by here on occasion. So this is Malachi Fields, Virginia, caught 58 passes last year, 55 the year before. One of the best wide receivers in the ACC, has just entered the transfer portal. And also Deuce Alexander of Wake Forest. Their head coach, Dave Clawson, after 11 seasons, stepped down as head coach. We don't know if that had anything to do with it, but Wake's wide receiver, Deuce Alexander, he caught 38 balls last year. He has entered the transfer portal just here recently as well. All right, Leanne, we've got, of course, Justice Haynes. We talked about his entry into the portal, and he's making his visits both in SEC and in Big Ten country.
Yes, he is. He's a name we mentioned yesterday, and we've been talking a lot about him. When he came on the market, it was pretty evident that at the running back position that he was going to have no problem getting that NIL value. We've seen exactly what he's been able to do. He's been a hot commodity for several schools. Of course, today the Rebels are hoping that, they signed T1 Lacey. Could Justice Haynes be our guy? Like I said, another running back that we are going after. Ahmad Hardy has already made his visits. So again, it looks like the Rebels are going to definitely try to add at least another running back from the portal, possibly two, with the signing of T1 Lacey. So this is going to be a very key visit for the Rebels. And then tomorrow, of course, he is set to go out to South Carolina, go visit that Beamer craziness, which, an explosive running back like him would have no problem fitting up. And of course, Michigan, who we'll talk about here in just a second, who got a monster pickup that's kind of got Ole Miss ties in there that we'll talk about. And then, of course, we talked about, despite that $20 million roster, Mark, money can't buy everything. Ohio State's the perfect example. They're still trying to look up their run game. So they are knocking super, super hard. They are not letting up on trying to get in the market for Justice Haynes. But again, they are going for a lot of high blue chip running backs. And is there room in Ohio State for two blue chip guys? We shall see. But right now, we haven't really heard from the Haynes camp as far as if they will be making a visit for Ohio State just yet. But Ohio State, by no means what we're hearing on their end, on the program's end, is definitely looking to try to sneak in late and continue to pursue Justin Haynes services.
Yeah, when you look at a place like Ohio State, and there's only about 3 to 4 schools in the country like this, of course, they picked up Quinshon Judkins. He has yet to make his decision about the NFL draft. Travion Henderson. Those guys were kind of 1 and 1A. Neither one of them was the starter. They were both starters. And Travion Henderson, he's moving on to the NFL. And I could name another 3 to 4 guys in the ranks behind them from the 22, 23, 24 recruiting classes, let alone the guys that are coming in 25 that are 4 and 5 star guys. But if they have a NFL draft decision by Quinshon Judkins, they're just one of those teams that, despite having stacks of 5 stars in their backfield that are inexperienced, they'll probably want to, grab a Justice Haynes to have one guy who's been in big games, who's carried the ball against top competition, and not go with just a bunch of inexperienced freshmen and sophomores.
Sure. Taking on to that point that you said, when we look at a lot of guys, a lot of other guys would be like, why would he not want to look at Ohio State? But like you just mentioned there, Ohio State this is where depth can kind of hurt you. You want to have good depth, but like you said, there's so many undecided factors of who's staying, who's going. And a lot of these running backs that are coming in, they're looking to make an impact. They might not be the starting guy, but they want to know that they're going to be in the competition. They're not looking to be, at the tail end and the back end, especially the guys that may not have a lot of eligibility. So a lot of people say, why wouldn't he look at a place like Ohio State? Because there's a lot of, unknowns as who's going to stay, who's going to go, how many guys am I really competing with? Why am I going to take a chance on a place where I might be competing with a lot of guys, including freshmen that are 4 and 5 stars? Not saying that his talent wouldn't equate that, but why not go to a place where they need a running back right now? Like, I'm going to be number 2, number 3, and I really have a shot at starting or be at least a vital part in the system. So, in a place like where Ohio State is stacked at certain positions, sometimes it can be kind of a turnoff for star running backs or a lot of star players like that they don't want to go there despite the NIL deal, because they know that they don't know where they're going to stand. And a lot of the times that can be a deciding factor, especially in the transfer portal, because it moves so quickly, because it moves so fast. And we also have to remember, sometimes programs move away from kids. As highly touted as some of these kids are, they move away from them because maybe financially they are not able to bring them on, because of course they have to make other roster adjustments and so forth. So Ohio State's a perfect example where, depth can hurt you in a certain way, because there's a lot of variables, because a lot of these guys, they want to come in. They've been sitting and waiting their turn, and it's not that they're not patient, but they don't want to go to another place and sit and wait their turn for another year, or not be an intricate part of whatever side of the ball they're playing.
We appreciate everyone being here at the Voice of College Football. Please like the video and subscribe, and certainly follow Leanne on social media. You'll see her X handle here in just a second on the banner. And of course, we've got our Ole Miss show with Leanne and with Ruby every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time on the Ole Miss channel, and we will get you that link as well. Now, here's a destination for a particular player that's kind of odd, because when you put together the stats and put together the school, you wouldn't necessarily think that this wide receiver would set up well for the kind of visits that he's getting, but he's obviously extremely talented in terms of this Idaho wide receiver who's visiting some very prominent coaches.
Yeah, he's a name that's kind of just jumped him. Like I said, before you judge, and you look at his numbers, you look at his tape. For those of you who maybe watch some late night football against, I think he was really impressive. He played, number 1 Montana State last Friday. I got his numbers: 11 catch, 189 yards a game, 2 touchdowns. Like I said, and everybody wants him, Mark, right now. Kirby Smart's been on the horn. Jeff Levy's been on the horn. Brent Venables been on the horn. So a lot of key programs that you wouldn't expect. But again, that's the wonderful thing about the portal. This is where you find the gems. This is where you find the high value players who may not cost you a lot. And the good thing about these guys, remember, we're not only taking into consideration what they can do, they're taking in maturity, leadership, but can they execute on the field? That's the difference why you see a lot more movement in the transfer portal versus why you see the transition, even for your top guys in high school recruiting, because we've said it here time and time again, 4 and 5 stars at a high school level, not everybody translates it. Few people can be like some of the kids we talk about, especially at the quarterback position. But when I saw this kid and then I was like, really, we're really going after him, But then you look at his tape and then you see what you can see. And you see exactly why he catches the eyes of Kirby Smart, why he catches the eyes of Jeff Levy, especially Levy looking to really build at Mississippi State. I know you had the quarterback up there from Florida State heading to Mississippi State. Jeff Levy right now, one of the, top offensive guys in the country, is trying to find a way to turn around his team down in Starkville. He's got a lot of weapons and assets, but he's lost, guys like Coleman and other key players. We've seen a lot of movement of that. And that's one thing we talked about. Like, there's a lot of teams that are losing key guys and starters because of the transfer portal. So now you're having to plug and play and replenish. But again, you can find a lot of diamonds in the rough, like that kid. And like I said, when you see his tape, when you watch him, you can see why he could be so appealing and why places like Georgia and Mississippi State and Oklahoma are looking to use him and try to go after him.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing all sorts of guys coming out that are grabbing my attention. And these are just coming down in the last hour. Joseph Marjack, he has been at both the USC and Houston as wide receiver, fill-in guy, but he does have 90 career catches. And he's expected to be going to TCU based on 247 sports projections. And you mentioned Luke Kromenhoek. I'll get to him in just a second, but I came across this just in the last hour. It's being reported by 247 that Arkansas has picked up a wide receiver from UAB in Cam Shanks. He had an extremely productive year as a freshman, as you see right there, 62 catches, 656 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And again, Luke Kromenhoek was a prized recruit coming out of high school. Of course, he played behind Jordan Travis, and then DJ Uiagalelei got some time once they benched Uiagalelei, and obviously the season went south in a hurry for Florida State, so they gave a lot of time to Brock Glenn and Kromenhoek, but he has decided to move to Mississippi State. Jeff Levy may be going to build his 2025 offense around the former Florida State quarterback. So, Leanne, we also have, speaking of quarterbacks, and speaking of Mississippi State and the SEC, a name that's very familiar to SEC fans would be Zach Calzada, who's been at Auburn, has been at Texas A&M, probably most famously led that upset of number 1 Alabama back in 2021. And if anyone's not aware of where he's been hiding, it's been him posting up all sorts of huge numbers at Incarnate Word, but Zach Calzada looking to get back into the big time.
He is looking back to get into the big time. And Incarnate Word, believe it or not, is just up the road, about an hour away, small Catholic college here in San Antonio. So get to see a lot of, because what a lot of people are surprised that Incarnate Word and UTSA have produced a lot of strong quarterbacks. A lot of the Texas talent, a lot of the regional talent come to Incarnate Word, come to places like UTSA. So UTSA last year especially, known for its wide receivers, Incarnate Word the same with there must be something in that Alamo Riverwalk water, because I'm telling you, there's a lot of diamonds, a lot of gems that come out of Incarnate Word and the development there. Like I said, the football program hasn't been around too long there, but definitely a name that is looking to get back into the ranks. Over 2 seasons, 6,342 yards, 54 touchdowns. And it looks like the place, my home away from home, where it all started for me, was back in the Bluegrass. And I'm not talking about the Louisville Cardinals. They already seem to have their guy, but Mark Stoops is looking for his quarterback. We've seen it time and time again, this Jekyll and Hyde. Kentucky has been one of the most patient SEC schools under the Stoops reign. I remember when Stoops first came in, he was trying to turn water into wine, because of course we all know how Kentucky basketball was so much more revered in football, but he's really taken that program to the next level, really made it an SEC caliber program. Of course, that's a team that the Ole Miss Rebels will never forget what they were able to do. But again, they seem to be the prime target, the prime place. He's set to visit, what we're hearing from sources, set to actually visit Lexington today. And that's kind of the place we're seeing. So this might be the one and done for him to go. But again, another really productive gem that I think could be the answer to all the offensive woes for Mark Stoops down and the Wildcats. Like I said, he's been really productive, works really meticulous, great, great in the great arm and everything. Has some development, but like anything, I think that in a program like Kentucky, who's really looking for a strong signal caller that's not going to be so high and so low, so not wishy-washy. I think he would be a good fit, and it seems like I wouldn't be surprised if by night's end or by morning that he's a Kentucky Wildcat, because it just seems like everything seems like a go here, and I think Mark Stoops could find his guy this afternoon.
I've got a post that, again, just came down in the last 2 hours from 247 Sports concerning Nebraska running back Dante Dowdle. So he was at Oregon the previous season, playing behind, can't think of his name, the Minnesota transfer running back. Anyway, and then with Jordan James coming in and being the prominent, and Noah Whittington at Oregon, he saw that his carries would be limited. He went to Nebraska, Dante Dowdle. And this is where I stopped trying to figure out why these guys are transferring. I stopped trying to figure that out a while ago, because certain situations, especially a quarterback, were pretty obvious to figure out. But Dante Dowdle, not that he was a featured back at Nebraska, he carried the ball about 12 or 15 times a game, but he scored 12 touchdowns last year. Like, he was a prominent member of the offense, but he's in the transfer portal and looking to go somewhere else. So
yeah, no, we could sit here all day, like you said, Mark, with and try to figure out the situations. We can kind of understand why the young guys leave, or why the guys that don't get a lot of playing time, or for whatever reason are coming injured, or don't feel like they're getting developed. But I actually had his name on my notes because he was one of the late guys that I saw come in. This is another guy. Don't be surprised if if the Crimson Tide are going to come calling. And I say this because he is from Picayune, Mississippi. He was highly, highly recruited by the Rebels. Before, like we talked about, Oregon, Nebraska, there was a lot of guys coming after this. One of the most productive running backs in his recruiting cycle. So I expect that Ole Miss, if they haven't already, will be making a call to this kid. And he might be wanting to come back closer to Mississippi, come back closer to home. But again, he was very productive. He was a very productive back. Was very versatile when he was at Picayune. The Rebels have a long-standing relationship recruiting in that area. We've got some great players, across the last couple recruiting cycles, obviously, that have come out of here. So I expect him to get a lot of calls from some SEC schools, and I bet if it's not already happened, that Ole Miss will be one of those programs, especially looking to build a guy that they've seen. And I think this is another reason why we see a lot of kids that have regional roots, as I like to call them. A lot of the coaches tend to go after these kids, and they get them, on the back end after they've gotten some development, after they've been able to see how they're productive. Because like I said, Dow is a pretty, well recruited, regional running back with a lot of talent. A lot of schools obviously were going after him. But again, at the running back position, I think he still needed time to develop, and we saw what he could do at Nebraska, what he could do there. So I think that the Rebels and some other SEC schools, if they haven't already called, I haven't had a chance to check that one out, but I bet you that phone call is already being made, definitely with all those ties to Mississippi. But again, when you see a lot of kids, when we talk about, well, why do they go to these schools? And we have to remember, outside their talent, outside their things, they have a lot of relationships, groups, coaches, so many factors, so many moving parts. That's why, like I said, we're here daily to try to bring you all the latest and all the intel that we can.
Absolutely. And I just passed the reports on a couple linemen in the SEC. You got Damon Payne, who was a former 5-star who went to Alabama. He just entered the portal the last couple hours. Hunter Erb, offensive lineman, was a top 150 player in his class at Texas A&M. Hasn't been able to get a starting role there. He's in the portal. We could go on and on in regards to another Texas A&M offensive lineman transfer right here, Cam Dewberry, and he was a top 65 overall recruit, and it's just endless. And if you noticed, and we talked about this the other day, go ahead.
No, Cam will be a kid to watch. I watched him in high school, and when you see his size, it's just wow. And it, like I said, he was everything as advertised. another, highly touted recruit that I think will get some high value. He's going to make somebody's line, you know, very, very stout. Like I said, and a lot of the A&M guys are leaving, looking for, other places as much as, Texas A&M obviously is one of those teams that has a lot of NIL and booster backing where they see no problem. If they want something, they're going to go after it. Money's not necessarily a problem in those issues, but we see a lot of guys like Cam that, were highly touted, high top players looking for a new home because it doesn't seem to be a fit. I don't know if we have it up here, but there's another lineman, a really young guy that Ole Miss was actually after, and a lot of schools were actually. He's actually roots from New Jersey, out of Bergen Catholic. That's where he came out of high school. He was right after the cycle after Tywone Malone, which obviously Ohio State guy that we know now, the former Ole Miss kid, was highly touted recruit. But that's another name that I didn't make notes on, but he's another name. He just entered the portal, Sadir Mitchell. I think he's a Texas Longhorn right now. Obviously, like I said, New Jersey roots, Bergen Catholic, one of the top producing schools out in New Jersey on the East Coast, known for producing a lot of high-level linemen. And very high up there in that route. So Sadir Mitchell will be another kid that I think will be a hot commodity as far as looking for linemen. Again, like I say, as much as we talk about wide receivers and running backs and quarterbacks and key defensive players, there's a lot of teams out there, if they're not already looking, that they need to go look for some linemen, Ole Miss included. They had some good points, but again, I think that's what I always say. It begins with the big guys up front in the trenches. If you want to have all these star receiving forward, to be able to make plays happen, you got to get some big guys up line. Ole Miss learned it a couple years ago when they went out and they recruited defensive line for size and physicality. There's a lot of teams out here that it's quite evident that their high profile investments aren't reaping the returns that they're wanting to see because they're having difficulty finding that size and that line prowess that they need to have in order to be able to protect their quarterback and keep him clean in the pocket. We saw it all season long, not just at Ole Miss, but also other teams. So I expect the linemen I feel like the linemen in the portal, they are a necessity, but always one of the overlooked high ticket items. But there are a lot of high level linemen like Cam Dewberry, like Sadir Mitchell, that are beginning to be coming up in the next days. That some of these teams really should be looking, hey, maybe we don't take a wide receiver, maybe we go get a lineman. I promise you it will pay off in the long run.
Max Clare from Purdue, the tight end, one of the best in the Big Ten, is a guy that we highlighted the other day. And look at his list of visits. Texas A&M coming up, a trip to Louisville on Wednesday. So he's a value commodity. Will in the chat is letting us know that Notre Dame may take a flyer on him. And so it looks like Max Clare is in a great position to go pretty much anywhere he wants in terms of a lot of big name schools going after him. Leanne, is there anything else you wanted to hit on?
No, just kind of hitting on what you're saying, Max, though, definitely. And I know he's going to take a Texas tape, but something tells me, and I'm going to go after we get off here, I'll definitely have some more information on that. I'm going to talk to some of my Louisville insiders and kind of talk about, because we all have seen how Purdue has kind of been able to be a feeder towards the Louisville program and to help build. And I kind of like Louisville in this one. Like I said, that's just coming off the cuff and the gut of just being on the recruiting trail. But I think that Max Clark could find a home in Louisville. I know Jeff Brom definitely has a way of selling his former Purdue players to be able to come down to Louisville, not too far from home. So I wouldn't be surprised if Louisville comes out with a strong visit, despite him going to Texas and Texas A&M. Because again, I think with a kid like Max Clark coming to Louisville and all the weapons and assets he would have around him, there's a lot of young talent in there that Louisville has been able to. But again, I think another key thing that we don't talk about enough, aside from the NIL, I was talking about it with some other people, when we signed Keelan Lacey yesterday, well, just how much NIL, when there was rumors breaking of, Alabama, a highly talented Alabama, a prospect possibly, signing with Ole Miss and everything, that was very much not, I won't speak on that just because I haven't got any kind of intel that I feel strong enough to share about that. But that's just how it moves in the transfer portal. A lot of gossip, a lot of hearsay. But I will say in the case like Max Clark, and I think like a lot of places, aside from, NIL, the key thing that I think a lot of where we see in places like where Louisville will find success and other programs is the development. I think a lot of these players, despite the financial being a big part of it, the development, some of these players do have aspirations to go play in the NFL, and they're not going to go waste their time at a place where they know they can't develop, or where they know. And I think like a place like Louisville has become such a hotbed for so many top high school recruits. If we look at the last recruiting classes from this season and the year before, Jeff Brom has really done an excellent job of bringing some top talent consistently across the board, whether Louisville's doing good and whether they're not. So that's a testament of what the culture and what the locker room is looking at. And I feel like a tight end like Max Clark could very well end up at Louisville, because I feel like he's looking for a place where he can develop and where he can also be a star. And Louisville's willing to put up, the financial on their end to be able to bring a talented tight end like that. Because we saw, how tight ends were very underused, but when they were put in the system, how effective they could be and what game changers they were in big games this season, not just in the SEC, but in the ACC across the board.
All right, look at this. So before we get to the latest news coming down, George, I'm right there with you. This drives me crazy. And I'm not blaming the young men involved. I'm not blaming the players. They're just working within the system. So they're going to do whatever they're allowed to do. This drives me crazy, though. And really, we just saw this happen a ton last year at this time, for the first time while we've had a transfer portal going for the last 3 to 4 years. Last year was the first time I noticed this happening a ton, where the season would end, guy would enter the transfer portal, he would move schools in December, then he would go into spring practice, he would practice with his new team for spring practice, he would re-enter the transfer portal. So basically, he never played for that team, and he would move on to another team for the next season. And so basically what I think of there is that coaching staff wasted a ton of time, ton of effort, money, travel, visits, time, all of that, and also the academic staff getting them enrolled and all the paperwork done. And then all they did was take up a spot during spring practice and take up somebody else's reps, and actually held back the football team a little bit. And then they decided to move on somewhere else. And so again, I'm not faulting the player, because they're just doing what the system allows them to do. So just coming up with some kind of rule that would tie the player to a particular school after they've enrolled for at least one football season would be my recommendation, because what George is talking about right there is what drives me crazy.
And it drives me crazy too. I mean, we see it, especially we know the portal will close on the 28th, but of course there's always exceptions, coaches leave and so forth, or those like things that, those exceptions. And then again, like you said, and then you have the early enrollees who have signed as well. Some of them go through spring and they do the same thing. They hit the portal by summer, and and I think that's when we see a lot of movement. But I think at some point, like you said, Mark, there's going to have to be some regulation where they're tied down, because as as we see more people learning to navigate the portal, because it's not so much that these kids, they're trying to navigate the system and you can't blame them, but at the same time, it's like you said, they take up money, they take up time when their intention is never to stay. Because again, we're going to have a lot of kids who just are not patient. They feel out the spring, they don't feel like they're going to be that guy, so they're going to go search for another home. But that's like a domino effect. One does it, more of them do it. So then you're still stuck in the same boat. You're down roster, you're down players, and you're down money. So yeah, that's something that the committee is, as strict as they are on other stuff or rules that they want to intact super quick on other things and really quick to jump on. That's a rule that, is something that's really got to be looked at seriously now that we're 3-4 years, heading in our fourth year into the portal. We know how to navigate. Is it going to be perfect? No, it's not going to be yet, because there's still a lot to learn, especially as, rules change, things navigate, and we try to, the changing landscape of college football. But the spring, like you said, is where we're going to see it a lot, and where we do see it a lot, as far as the movement and guys just not willing to sit and wait their turn anymore.
Leanne and I will be here each and every day to update you on the transfer portal and any recruiting news as well. And of course, it's Ruby, it's Leanne, and myself for Ole Miss Live on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And get this, Leanne. So just since we've been sitting here, just since our last little update, this one came down about, it says 41 minutes, but I don't think it was that long because it just popped up about 10 minutes ago. So here's about another 3 pretty impactful transfer notices. Alabama wide receiver Kobe Prentice. Now, here's a guy who broke on as a freshman in 2022, had a nice season with 31 catches, and then he has kind of stepped back in regards to other guys have passed him by, and he's been more of a role player for Alabama, but he's committed to Baylor, as he has let us know on Instagram, and he's got 1 year of eligibility. Then we've got Auburn. We talked to Auburn football with our guy Kyle Loomis on the show yesterday, and they add an offensive tackle in Mason Murphy, who was a top-level recruit for USC a couple years ago. And then this is former Mississippi State wide receiver Mario Craver, who had 17 catches, 3 touchdowns for the Bulldogs as a freshman. He is committed to Texas A&M. So all this has come down in the last 17 minutes.
Yeah, and like you said, those are a lot of big key guys that had highly touted high school careers and kind of just have been impact. But again, they're going to a place like when we talk about that wide receiver going to Baylor. I mean, it doesn't surprise me because Baylor is in need of wide receivers, and that's also a big thing to consider. These guys are going where they can be an instant impact. So as much as I want to talk NIL and money, and I know that's a constant question is, well, how much are we paying them? How much are we paying them? Well, that's a big factor. But a lot of these guys really, like I said, they're looking to go to a place where they're developed because they're trying to up their stock. Just like these guys right now that, go from smaller schools, they go play at these smaller schools trying to up their stock because once they hit the portal, they know because look at where the highest value players are going and where they're ending up. They're going at big schools. And then you got high value players like, from Alabama to Baylor. And I'm telling you, there's stuff to do in Tuscaloosa, but Tuscaloosa is a lot more happening than Waco, Texas. And where Baylor is. But again, this is a great pickup from Dave Aranda. Baylor, despite being in the hub of Texas, I mean, Waco's, less about hour and a half maybe away from Dallas. So they got a lot of talent surrounding them between Dallas and Houston and those surrounding amples, a lot of gems along the way in Temple, Texas. But that's another program that really hasn't utilized what it has in its backyard with their own guys to make them successful. I mean, Baylor went from being this high-powered kind of program to watch when Dave Aranda took over. We know what kind of defensive brilliance that Aranda brings, but this year they really just couldn't find a way. So this adding that explosiveness of Alabama wide receiver who really has had sparks and we know his potential. I think this is a great get for the Baylor Bears.
So Gizmo was mentioning here, if they want to keep them for a full football season, they sign them to a contract. So the issue there, Gizmo, is that, certainly Leanne is more well-versed when it comes to contracts and legalities than I am, so she can correct me if I'm wrong. But these guys are not employees. You cannot sign them to a contract. What they sign is, of course, a letter of intent initially, and then they're enrolled in the school. So they are as tied to the school as any one of us, and they sign a scholarship, but you cannot do anything past that. Now, starting in 2025, the 25-26 academic year, then this pay structure is supposed to kick in where these players are paid based on the TV and the media rights revenue. Then that could be a different deal because suddenly they are tied to an income distribution, and you could possibly sign them for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case might be, and we'll see a whole new level of commitment there. But for the time being, that's not able to be done.
No, because then you have to go and just similar to like what you would have, it would have to be structured like what they do with the coach's contract. Of course, every state has its own rules. Like of course in the state of Mississippi, there's always that thing about, the contract. Despite wanting to offer an extension for a coach, you have to wait so many years before you can offer that extension. So there's a lot of legalities, like you said, going into as far as now player. Now a lot of these players right now, where they could try to build something is where they have, of course, NIL representation. Most universities have some kind of collective, so of course, but those are also separate entities, separate contracts that they go into that aren't directly tied to the university, that aren't directly affecting their eligibility and their scholarship. So that's almost like like you're an independent contractor is the easiest the way to say it. But there's so many loopholes. But again, that would be the ideal to sign them to some kind of contract within their scholarship. But again, there would be so many other things as far as every state, because then we're talking about, like Mark said, they would be an employee of the university, considered employee through the state because there'd be taxes, all these type of things, so I think that's too why we see the separation, obviously, with NIL as like more of an independent contractor. I mean, these kids have their own contracts. Some of the collectives handle it. Some of the, like I said, these kids have agents now. And that's a whole nother ball game as far as where that goes and where that takes, this whole stretch as far as, where deals can come in, because, we haven't talked about it a lot, but, NIL representation also plays a big part in this, not so much the financial end, but, a lot of the connections that these people or these agents that are representing these kids, the ties that they have to the program.
All right, Leanne, anything else you'd like to hit on today?
No, I just want to wish you good luck to all the kids that are competing in the Georgia State playoffs. We talked a little bit about yesterday, and then today, of course, two teams that are going head-to-head matchups. A lot of players to watch. We mentioned them yesterday, of course. Number 2 in the country, the Milton Eagles will be heading back to the Benz to face another touted Georgia program in Langston Hughes. So if you're out in Georgia, head out to the Benz. See a lot of talent that you've heard about, of course, on the Milton side of the ball. Miami commit. 4-star QB Luke Nickel, Ryan G, Auburn commit, CJ Wiley. If you were a dog fan and you haven't seen that kid operate, man, it's going to be great to see him in Athens. Of course, Tristan Payne, Hayden Shermia, 2 2025 guys we mentioned yesterday, still on the board. Coaches out there still looking for some guys, some dogs. There's a lot of guys on both sides of the ball out at Langston Hughes and Milton. They'll be playing tonight, 7 o'clock for the Georgia State Championship.
Awesome. You will see Leanne and myself for another update coming up on Wednesday. We also have the Ole Miss show at 2 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday, and we hope you will join us then. Hit the like button on the way out. Check out Leanne's work. As you can see, it's right on X, and you've got her handle right there. Leanne, good to see you, and we'll do it again on Wednesday.
We will do it again tomorrow and see what news we can bring you. See y'all tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.